Good morning, everyone joining me here in London, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and also the 100+ who are joining us virtually from across Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. I'm Michael Lawrence. Welcome to Asia House. Very pleased to see you all here today. And today's event is titled Forging Resilience, Reimagining Global Trade Flows for a New Era. And we're producing the conference in partnership with McKinsey Global Institute. Now, at this event, we're going to be exploring how geopolitics, technology, and new trading relationships are reshaping the global flows of goods, of services, capital, people, data, and ideas. And we're doing so at a time when there is almost constant debate and discussion about decoupling, de-risking, and deglobalization. And these are turbulent times. We know that governments and businesses are navigating significant disruption and volatility. There are a myriad of issues, from Russia's invasion of Ukraine to the prolonged tensions between China and the United States. And they've highlighted the importance of resilience in supply chains. Now, the basis for our discussions today will be two major reports by McKinsey: Global Flows, the ties that bind in an interconnected world, and the second report, the complication of concentration of global trade. Now, I've read these reports and I was struck by a couple of the headline findings. Firstly, despite all the rhetoric, no region is even remotely close to being self-sufficient. Every region relies on trade with others. Further, about 40% of global trade is concentrated, and that is, importing economies rely on 3 or fewer nations for this share of global trade. McKinsey has found that informed reimagination of global trade requires a granular approach, both in mapping concentrated trade relationships and in deciding what action to take, whether it's to double down, to decouple, or diversify. Businesses and policymakers are examining where inputs come from, and in some cases, contemplating at least reconfiguring or even breaking certain long-standing trade ties. In a few moments, I'll be inviting Jongmin Song, partner at McKinsey Global Institute, to brief us on the findings of the report. He's kindly flown in from Shanghai. Very good to see you. That will set the scene for our discussions later with experts from policy and businesses from a whole range of sectors. But first, to deliver our keynote address, please welcome to the podium Nusrat Ghani, UK Minister of State at the Department of Business and Trade, and also Minister for Industry and Economic Security. Minister, welcome to Asia House.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you to Asia House for inviting me to join this discussion about global trade flows and to share some of the government's thinking. I am indeed the Industry Minister, which means I'm responsible for advanced manufacturing, and that includes supply chains and critical minerals. So this is most definitely right up my street. Thank you so much for the invitation. As you all know, the UK government has been a vocal champion of free, fair, rules-based international trade. Why? Well, because free trade fuels the engines of growth and prosperity. It enables firms to grow by giving them access to new markets and customers abroad. It boosts productivity and encourages innovation. It brings consumers greater choice at lower costs. And it supports resilience by diversifying our supply chains and reducing dependence on particular suppliers. For generations, free trade has raised people's quality of life, and not just here in Britain, but across the globe. It's no coincidence that in the last 30 years, as trade liberalisation has dismantled barriers and enhanced market access, we have seen the proportion of people across the globe living in extreme poverty plummet from 36% to less than 10%. For all these reasons, this government is absolutely committed to maintaining and strengthening an open, resilient, and fair multilateral trading system. It is something from which we have all benefited and something we should all be defending. But we are also under no illusions. The global trading system as we know it is under unprecedented strain. Geopolitical fragmentation is driving protectionism and increasing market-distorting practices, from excessive tariffs to discriminatory subsidies and even outright export bans. Major world events, including COVID-19 and Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine, have brought home the importance of resilient supply chains. Following Russia's pulling out of the Black Sea Grain Initiative and its barbaric attacks on Ukrainian ports, it's become clear the importance of brokers of supply chains. For example, the port operators, those that own freight and cargo ships and all the supporting infrastructure. Many people may not have been aware, but as a maritime minister, it's something that we have been working hard on for many years, and now it's become apparent how critical they are to supply chain resilience. These attacks have knocked industry growth off course, while also playing havoc with prices, putting pressure on ordinary people, including here in Britain. Never before has the link between secure supply chains and economic growth, inflation, interest rates, been so apparent. Strains like these pose challenges for open free trading economies such as the UK's, and we should expect further shocks in the coming years, whether that's demand spikes, supply shortages, or both. So whilst the government will continue to bang the drum for free, fair and rules-based international trade that benefits us all, we also can't bury our heads in the sand about the challenges we face. So at my department, the Department of Business and Trade, we are working to strengthen the long-term resilience of UK's global supply chains. In November, we published a supply chain resilience framework to help businesses mitigate their supply chain risks. It sets out the range of options available to develop stronger supply chains, from diversification to demand management. And we have provided further support through individual schemes and targeted critical supply chain strategies, for example, the Automotive Transformation Fund and a new Circular Critical Minerals Supply Chains Fund. By 2040, the world is expected to need 4 times as many critical minerals for clean energy technologies as it does today. So earlier this year, I led a refresh of the UK's critical mineral strategy, a key strategy in safeguarding UK industry, supporting the clean energy transition and protecting national security and defence capability. As part of that work, I launched an independent task and finish group to investigate critical mineral vulnerabilities across UK's major manufacturing industries. That group will deliver a report at the end of this year, and I'm looking forward to studying their findings and how we can further improve our critical minerals supply chain resilience. Shortly, we'll also be publishing our critical import strategy. This will set out the UK government's approach to building supply chain resilience alongside business. It aims to secure the imports needed for critical and growth sectors, enable economic growth and support critical services. This strategy will articulate the sectors that matter most to our economic growth and essential services, and the actions that we will take to build their resilience, both domestically and fundamentally internationally too. But of course, government policy alone is not enough. Supply chain vulnerability is a shared problem that requires shared action. That means governments working lock in step with industry and international partners for our mutual benefit. Our critical import strategy will also advise on the actions businesses should take to build the resilience of their own supply chains. And the UK is upping our collaboration with industry through initiatives like the Economic Security Private-Public Sector Forum to help us better communicate policies and develop joint actions. At an international level, we are working with like-minded partners to promote greater thought and collaboration on supply chain resilience. At the G7, we have been a vocal advocate of the new coordination platform on economic coercion to enhance supply chain resilience in key technologies and to coordinate on tools to prevent cutting-edge tech from falling into the wrong hands. It would also be remiss of me not to mention our support in Ukraine. The UK was proud to co-host the most recent Ukraine Recovery Conference in London. This brought together representatives from business, civil society and governments from 59 countries to commit to Ukraine's recovery. The conference raised around $60 billion in total. It's an amazing amount. It was also my privilege to chair the most recent UK-Ukraine Infrastructure Task Force, through which the UK and our partners will support the government of Ukraine in the recovery, not just post-conflict, of the rebuild of vital public infrastructure. We will continue to collaborate with Ukraine in their recovery and work with them on building stronger, more resilient and secure global supply chains. What matters here is, at some point, all the supply chains will be diverted to Ukraine to help them rebuild, adding an extra pressure on the rest of us in Europe. And of course, I am here at Asia House, and I should point out that the first UK-ASEAN Economic Dialogue was committed to working together to strengthen UK-ASEAN supply chains and trade between our businesses. But we are not just galvanizing action in multilateral fora, we are taking every opportunity to advance the cause at bilateral level too. At the Atlantic Declaration that the Prime Minister launched with the US President earlier this summer is an important economic security partnership. It covers a full spectrum of our economic, technological, commercial and trade relations. We've already announced the launch of negotiations on critical minerals agreements, supporting a strategically important sector. I know many people in this room will be anxious about IRA, for example. Earlier this year, I launched a critical mineral dialogue with Canada, the UK's second largest mineral supplier, to deepen our cooperation on critical minerals to strengthen our supply chains and boost innovation. And by working with another key partner through the UK-Australia Supply Chain Resilience Initiative, we are sharing our learnings and promoting the benefits of market-led approaches in order to help other nations' governments develop resilience in their supply chains too. There is, of course, more to be done to improve our economic security, and as a responsible government, we will leave no stone unturned. Whether that's expecting the increased use of data and technology, such as supply chain mapping, to understand critical supply chains and spot potential issues early, or ensuring a business-friendly environment that supports frictionless trade and attracts investment, both of which underpin resilience and economic security. Of course, the best way to address threats in the longer term is through reducing vulnerabilities and diversifying supply chains. And that is one of the reasons why our free trade agreement program is so important. From our ascension to CPTPP, which is opening up a market of more than 500 million people, to the FTAs and MOUs we have signed with more than 70 countries and counting. True resilience is not achieved through self-reliance. It is achieved through collaboration and building healthy, diverse supply chains through free trade. Only through free trade and investment can we secure the reliable and responsibly sourced supplies we need to survive and thrive. So we should, and this government will, continue to champion an open international trading system, working with like-minded partners to share expertise and develop the strong and resilient supply chains that can not only shield us from future shocks, of which there will be many, but pave the way to our long-term security and prosperity. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Minister, thank you very much for such a comprehensive speech. And you're obviously doing a lot of work in a whole series of spaces, but the critical minerals one interests us as well, and we were talking about it beforehand. And hopefully we'll see you back at Asia House again soon to share some of the findings, share the new strategies that you're adopting. So as I said, today's discussion is based on 2 reports by McKinsey. So it's my great pleasure to invite Jongmin Song, who's traveled from Shanghai to be with us today to brief us and present those 2 reports. Jongmin.
Thank you very much. Let me start by asking a question that will turn any dinner table into a battleground of opinions. Right? Are we heading towards a deglobalized world? Yes, raise your hand. No, raise your hand. Maybe, raise your hand. Yeah? Okay, so we've conducted a series of research on this topic, and let me quickly share our key messages. There are 5 of them. Number 1, no, we are not heading towards a deglobalized world, but then the fabric of global connection is evolving more towards knowledge and intangibles, which is growing much faster than goods flow. And number 2, as a result of this interconnection, we live in an interdependent world. No region is an island. So that's message number 2. Number 3, but then sometimes this interdependency leads to a complication of concentration, which will need to be managed. And number 4, therefore, for certain value chains, new forces, new considerations, such as resiliency, is becoming more important in terms of the future evolution of the value chain. And then number 5, there's still a lot of room for us to reimagine globalization instead of defaulting to a deglobalization. And out of this process, there's a lot of room for multinational companies to play a big role. So those are our 5 messages, and let me double-click one by one. Right? So in terms of the first message, This is a conventional way of looking at globalization, basically through the lens of trade. And if you look at the black line, that is the goods trade intensity, basically goods traded divided by GDP. Right? And if you look at the trend, especially over the past decade, it didn't really increase, right? So that's why some commentators are saying that, this is an evidence of deglobalization or globalization, right? But then what these commentators overlook is the fact that it is stabilizing already at a historic high level, right? So which is 2 to 3 times higher than the level of 1980s. And I have a childhood memory, right? So back then I was very young. I grew up in Korea, and banana was very expensive because it's costly to import banana, right? So kids from only rich family were able to eat banana. Today, my teenage daughter doesn't even eat banana, right? She gives it to her pet bunny, right? So we already live in a very, very different world, right? So, but then, what is more interesting is the new ties, right, that keep binding the world. If you look at the blue column here, those are the flows of data and knowledge and services and people. They have been growing at least 2 times faster than goods trade. And this is not just about macro statistics, right? So if you look at the R&D activities of top automotive players, right? The foreign R&D activities has been tripled over the past 2 decades. If you look at pharmaceutical sector, half of their patent generation is relying on cross-border collaboration. I'm based in Shanghai. There are about 500 foreign-funded R&D centers in Shanghai, right? So there are these new ties emerging that keep binding the world. So that is our first message. And second message, right? So as a result of that, we live in an interdependent world, right? So there are lots of colors here. You'll need to use your artistic sense to make sense of this chart. Here, the horizontal axis is different geography, and the vertical axis is the different categories of flows. Blue means that the region is a net exporter. Red means net importer. And the darker the color is, the more dependent you are on import. And then you see this red everywhere, right? So that's the interdependent world that we are living, right, today. And this is another way of looking at that interdependency, basically through the lens of people. For example, in order to serve the North American demand, there are 60 million people outside of North America working, producing something, right, to serve the demand of North America, right? So, for example, more than 80% of Christmas tree, right, imported by the U.S. is coming from China. In order for Santa Claus to drop by American homes, you need Chinese workers, right? Another example is India, right? So India is the largest exporter of processed diamond, right? In order for Europeans to fall in love and get married, you need the help of Indian workers, right? So this is the evidence of the interconnected world, even through the lens of people, right? So that is our second message, right? But then sometimes this interdependency turns into the complexity of concentration, and we analyzed about 6,000 globally traded products, and out of that, about 40% of the products tend to be concentrated, meaning importing nations rely on 3 or fewer supplying partners, right? And then out of that 40%, 10% is so-called global concentration. Globally, there are only 2 to 3 supplying economies anyways. For example, soybean, right? So about 90% of the global export is coming from US and Brazil. That's global concentration. Another type of concentration is called economy-specific concentration or local concentration, which is about 30%. So in this case, there are actually many global suppliers, but then this economy choose to import only from 2 to 3 suppliers for some reason, and this could be often a target of diversification. And then we can draw this concentration map by different geography and by different sector, and this is an example of sector concentration map, right? Further to the right means high concentration, to the left means low concentration. And let's take agriculture as an example, right? So salmon is a globally concentrated product, right? So therefore, if you are a salmon lover, you need to closely monitor the diplomatic relationship between your country and Norway, for example, right? If you are a coffee lover, you are okay, right? Because it's not that concentrated, right? So unless your brain does not function, if you don't drink a particular coffee made out of coffee bean from Ethiopia, you are okay, right? So you can develop this kind of, concentration map by your own sector and your company as well, and think about, diversification strategy. And also, the concentration topic is critical in the context of climate transition, because climate transition will be minerals intensive, and these critical minerals tend to be also concentrated both at the mining stage and also refining stage, right? So the top 3 countries tend to account for somewhere between 60 to 100% of global supply, right? So therefore, in order to make the climate transition work, we need a global value chain, global supply chain, right? So that is our third message. And fourth message, then let's talk a bit about the future. And then, Sir Winston Churchill said that a nation that forgets its past doesn't have any future. So we listened to him, and we looked at the past. And if you look at the modern history, we think that there may have been a waves of globalization. And the first wave was, back in 1990s or early 2000, and that was the golden age of the globalization. And at the time, the tariff and transportation costs dropped by 50 to 60%, and so-called, the great unbundling happened, right? So disaggregation of the value chain, specialization. Therefore, many economies participated in global value chain. Therefore, for 90% of the sectors, the trade intensity increased, right? So that was the first wave. Second wave was around, 2008, when, global financial crisis happened. And back then, the role of emerging economies became a lot more important, right? So therefore, these emerging economies, tend to consume more of what they are producing, right? So China and India are a great example, right? Because the local demand has been increasing, and also local supply chains got matured, right? So therefore, globally, the trade intensity didn't decline that much, right? And then today, maybe the third wave is unfolding, and then a new constellation, new forces around resiliency or national competitiveness or national security start becoming more and more important, and that may be an important consideration for particular part of value chain. But then let me also ask another question. How fast the value chain will move, the supply chain will move globally? Fast? Very fast? Raise your hand. Not so much? It depends? Yeah. So, and we again listened to the Sir Winston Churchill, and we again looked at the history. And then if we analyze what happened in the past, the movement of value chain is very, very gradual, right? So in general, less than 0.5 percentage point per year. Even for China, 1 to 1.5 percentage point. And that's how some of my Chinese friends got rich, by the way, right? But then, if history is any guide, right? Despite, even though we are hearing a lot of news about, factories moving around in the world, the change could be, quite gradual. And then the pathways of this the value chain evolution could be different by sector, right? So, for example, maybe 10 to 20% of the value chain, so-called the critical sectors, non-market forces could play an important role. But then for many other sectors, still, the economic forces and the market forces will continue to play an important role in terms of the future configuration. And especially the services sectors, right? So there's still a lot more room to continue to get debundled, especially thanks to the role of technology. Therefore, still a lot more room for us to continue to drive the globalization. So that's our fourth message. And finally, how to think about the future in terms of reimagining the global connection. We think that the role of multinational companies will be very critical because they account for 2/3 of the global export anyways. And also at the same time, there is a very, very big value at stake for multinational companies to make the global flows work, right? And we've done some simulation and take automotive sector as an example. In case of global disruption, 40 to 60% of their enterprise value could be at stake, right? So therefore, what do we do about this? And we thought about 3 potential considerations for multinational companies. Number one, play offense, right? And we talked about the importance of the new ties, that is growing fast. And let's think about how to take advantage of the growth of these new flows, right? So, for example, 10 pharmaceutical companies, they formed a joint, data sharing platform. And using that data platform, they train, AI and accelerate the drug discovery process, right? So that can be an interesting business model, right? So that's the first action. Second action is to enhance the resiliency for your own company through diversification, through substitution, through localization, right? So there will be many strategies and tactics that companies can deploy. The third direction could be enhance the resiliency system for the entire system, right? By partnering with the ecosystem players or other private sector partners, or even forging, public-private sector partnership. And that's how we fought COVID, right? So those are the quick overview from our research. And then, we are about to launch a interactive digital platform next month, and then you'll be able to do your own analysis across different sectors and geography around interdependency and concentration, basically everything that we discussed. So if you are interested, please visit our website or pass your contact information to me. Look forward to learning a lot more insights from other panelists as well. Thank you.
Please. John, thank you. Fascinating research, and look forward to the digital platform where companies can access your super brain power, please, to assess where their own value chains sit. So now to turn to a panel discussion. We're going to explore some of the issues raised in the reports, but also perhaps go a little further. A little later, I'm going to be talking about the impact of technology specifically with Sami Nafak from Reckitt. But first, let's delve into these findings. I'm joined by Vivek Ramachandran from HSBC. Hi, Vivek. Daria Galparina, good to see you again. Hi. And from Zoom, on Zoom, we've got Alan Gepti, who's Assistant Secretary at the Philippine Department of Trade and Industry. Very good to see you again, Alan. And joining us from Beijing is Craig Abler, Director of Supply Chain Asia at Boeing. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon to you guys. Good morning to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Craig, if I may, I'll start with you. The airline industry has notoriously complex supply chains, and there's been a lot written about issues around it. How is Boeing navigating that? What changes are you making? What changes do you need to make?
Yeah, if we look at the last several years, they've been quite disruptive, what with the pandemic, Russia, Ukraine, many situations that have been discussed here today. And we've dealt with that. We've leveraged our distributed resources in order to work through those issues. And the lessons learned as we've worked through have led to strategies going forward around resilience. So we have distributed resources, particularly in supply chain, like my team throughout Asia, resources embedded with our suppliers, working with our suppliers to drive their performance to plan, partner with them to drive their performance to plan. During the COVID times and the COVID shocks, as many nations and suppliers went into closed loop systems, our distributed resources were able to go into those closed loop systems with the suppliers and keep production running, right? So that was incredibly valuable to us. And we learned where we didn't have such local distributed resources and where we need more of that, particularly around technical expertise to go qualify suppliers to various engineering processes or manufacturing processes. So going forward, we're trying to leverage more regionalization, more local for local in our execution, so that we can continue to tap into the broader global supply chain as necessary, but can feed and operate in our key markets more locally and independently if necessary.
That's interesting. So there has been a regionalization shift by you, more local, more regional, as part of you handling some of the issues. Daria, similar question to you. How have your supply chains had to change? Have they had to change? Because as the report pointed out, supply chain change is often very gradual.
Yes, thank you, Michael, and thank you for the invitation. Obviously, there are some changes in supply chains, but we are definitely not anywhere close to the complexity of supply chain that was just identified by the colleague from Boeing. Now, what I may say is that the changes in supply chain and optimization of supply chain started before recent events, before COVID, before invasion of Ukraine. So that's a pretty gradual program. So we started with a strategic roadmap of transform and accelerate before COVID. What COVID did, it accelerated some of the projects. Some accelerated in a way that what was on the paper we started implementing in life. And it meant bringing some additional capacity, bringing some changes also in suppliers. So for instance, if all our labels are produced in one country, so that's probably not very sustainable if something goes wrong in this country. So that's one example. Now, what I also wanted to underline is that there are limits of what you can do when changing your supply chain. So in our sector, our products as wines and spirits, so a lot of them are protected by geographical indications. Yes. So you can bottle a single malt Scotch only in Scotland, right? So we can't move it around. There's also environmental commitments that we have and social commitments, so which puts certain limitations on where we can move. And the word was said about localization. I would say here that localization, it's not necessarily a better choice when it comes to diversification from the environmental point of view. Sometimes the component of international trade in all environmental footprint, it's around 10%. For some of our brands. So moving it closer to consumers and localizing it would actually increase the environmental footprint. And also, you know, it takes time to establish, build relationship with the suppliers. So yes. It's not overnight.
Yeah, I mean, ESG is one of the disruptors, for want of a better term, and we'll be exploring that a little more later. Vivek, I want to turn to you about HSBC's report on global supply chains, just to start. And you interviewed nearly 800 companies, 14 markets, and it found that 64% of companies are planning to reduce their supply base, 84% are currently or planning to invest in supply chain sustainability, and 40% have implemented environmental policies across the supply chain. I think you're quoted as saying corporates are planning for uncertainty. Is that the best way to characterize the current shift in supply chains?
Yeah, I think as the previous speaker said, look, over the last many decades, supply chains have evolved with one objective, cost minimization. Yeah. Right? And that objective has been met at the expense of resilience and transparency. So we're seeing a few things change. The first is supply chains are not necessarily shifting, but getting fragmented. So when I talk to companies, they're splitting sourcing in Asia, China for China, and the rest of Asia. It's not going to be that easy to move production out of Asia. So I don't see supply chains fundamentally shifting from that perspective. But the second is ESG is not just what you do, it's what your suppliers do. Yes. And you've got regulations demanding that. So Germany, for example, has got a Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, where you've got to attest to the absence of human trafficking anywhere in your supply chain. The reality is the average company has no idea who's in their supply chain. Yes. You know who you contract with. You may nominate the next tier, but beyond that, zero visibility. So that's going to change quite a lot. So dealing with fewer companies, making sure you've got a backup plan, and recognizing not everyone's going to make it. So it is a difficult economic environment, and companies are squeezing as much out of their working capital. So it's a lot easier to do that when you've got fewer counterparties.
Absolutely. All right. So shifts are happening, but they're gradual and they're complicated because of various forces in play. Alan, I'd like to turn to you now, please, from the government perspective, from a government perspective, a policy perspective. What role do governments have to play in increasing the resilience of supply chains?
Thank you very much, Michael, for having me here, and a pleasant day to all. Well, on the part of the government, our perspective is that when you talk about supply chain resilience, basically it is directly related to the degree of relationship of the country with its trade and investment partners. So meaning to say, the stronger or more entrenched your economic relations with your trade and investment partners, then it follows that business relationship of the private sector would also gravitate or align with said partnership. And the question is, how do you intensify your degree of relationship with your trade and investment partners? Of course, there are many platforms, and for most of the list would be forging free trade agreements with clear provisions and the undertaking wherein you will have to strictly adhere to the rules-based system. So basically, I agree with Minister Gani when she mentioned earlier that the true resilience really is not more anchored on sufficiency, but it's more anchored on partnership. So in other words, on the part of the government, it's very important for us to have these strong platforms of engagement with our trade and investment partners, Michael.
Craig, back to you now in Beijing. You talked about more localization, but supply chain changes are notoriously difficult to make. They take time, they're gradual. Are we just at the beginning of what could be a whole dramatic reshaping of supply chains that won't take a year or two, but may take a decade?
Yes, I would agree. I mean, especially in our aerospace sector, where there is a lot of regulation and a lot of a provenance and control on the processes and the product, it takes a long time to move suppliers, qualify new suppliers, build up the technical expertise and capability. So yes, I agree with your assessment that it's not overnight. It's years in the making. But I think the disruptions of the last few years have shown us that optimizing just for cost is no longer a viable path forward.
So Daria, it's not really a cost issue now. You mentioned that earlier. It used to be supply chains are based on cost, but now it's a vastly more complicated situation. Is that what you're looking at from your business?
Absolutely, Michael. So I think what is kind of the message to the governments in this sense, because we are entering the question of this geopolitics and where and what. The best protection in our case, in our sector, that the governments can give is to keep the markets open.
Yeah.
So because during the uncertainty, and we are right now in a certain time, we need this flexibility and have fallback options and international trade to flow. So in this sense, I would underline three things. The first one is keep the relationship balanced with the countries where things are doing well. And here I would actually want to take an example of our example in China. For years, our business has been constantly growing in China, and since China joined the WTO, so the regulatory and the tax environment that we face in China is actually very favorable. So preserving what is good is already very important. So the policy needs to be very nuanced. If there are some sectors which are having troubles, let's keep it this way, but let's not broaden the scope. Second one is the free trade agreements. It's an amazing accelerator for diversification. So CPTPP, it's a great success story for the UK, not only in terms of the tariffs we should deliver, but it's a platform, if you wish, it's a platform for discussion and improving the relations even further. And UK-India FTA, I mean, I cannot underline enough the importance of this FTA for our sector and making it right. But Philippines, and so on. So, the third point is on enhancing the economic diplomacy. That's also very important because FTAs, it's a one thing, it takes time. And even if we have an FTA, sometimes it takes years and years and years to get where we are right now. So economic diplomacy, and I'm looking at the screen at our colleague in the Philippines. So, for example, to see what actually companies need beyond trade concerns, addressing trade concerns. Maybe there is a kind of topics around taxation that we could address together. So this private-public partnership, which is important to enhance at times of uncertainty to see how it could accelerate the diversification.
So Alan, 3 points out of that. Governments have responsibility, according to business, to keep markets open. Secondly, the importance of free trade agreements. And third, and I think possibly I'd like to explore that more, economic diplomacy is essential to talk not just about trade issues, but regulation beyond that, taxation and the like. Would you concur?
Yes, I fully agree with you on that. Basically, one important consideration really is to keep your market open and, of course, to ensure that there is a fair business environment. And to ensure this, you have to strengthen your FTAs. And yes, right now, maybe one thing that we have to consider also is that economic relationships are basically evolving. So from the conventional FTAs that we have, there are many platforms by which you can engage with your trade and investment partners. Maybe one thing that I can cite is the US initiative, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, where basically this is branded as non-conventional FTAs because there is no market access in the context of trade liberalization. But if you will peruse the same, there are 4 pillars here that are very important when it comes to strengthening your supply chain and also your economic partnership. Number 1, on pillar 1, of course, we have the trade pillar, which is expected. But pillar 2 is specifically dedicated on supply chain resilience. And I think the text has already been published, and you will know that among IPARC partners, we have a clear undertaking and also understanding that when it comes to critical sectors that we have to decide on, there has to be an assurance that the supply chains will be, of course, in a way guaranteed in the process. And also we have the third pillar, which is the clean economy, very important on clean transition, the clean economy, and of course in this context, environment protections, and even other emerging issues like labor and also climate change action, tax evasion, for example, and good governance. This will be covered also under pillar 4. So basically, IPEF partners are in unison in creating a very conducive environment wherein those other emerging and new issues that affect trade and investment in the regions will be addressed by the partners. So that is why we really have to be proactive, and this is part also of economic diplomacy, as mentioned earlier.
Vivek, I want to turn to supply chain finance now. And you said earlier that it's now not a cost issue. Sorry, cost is now not the main driver of supply chains. It used to be, but it isn't any longer. How has that had an impact on financing supply chains, and especially given the disruption and the shifts that are happening or likely to happen?
So access to financing remains a real challenge.
Yeah.
And so over the last few years, we've seen a lot of inventory build up in a lot of sectors. So now there's a lot of destocking and demand isn't coming back. So China demand is weak, Western demand is still muted. So access to financing remains a real challenge. A point which touched upon earlier, I think data will be key.
Yes.
And so access to data, which is validated and uniformly accepted, will make financing easier. It'll also ironically solve the issue of resilience quite a lot, because finding new counterparties and building trust today takes ages. So ironically, I think the pace at which supply chains change will be linked to the access to this information, which is now more freely available. So everyone talks about digitization of trade. Yep. I think in the next decade, we'll see that. The UK just passed the Electronic Trade Documentation Act. I think yesterday it went into law. If that's adopted across common law countries with a universal bill of lading, you can access financing earlier. And there's enough technology now where you can take it through the supply chain. So I think the next 5-10 years are going to be incredibly exciting.
But it's more about data, more about, it's harmonization, Craig, isn't it? It's harmonizing standards, harmonizing legislation around data. It's a massive issue. Many countries have different approaches to how they handle their data. And even just harmonizing, standardizing the taxonomy.
Well, you need 4 things, right? So you need common data standards, which doesn't exist today, right? An invoice doesn't look the same in any part of the world. Then you need a legal framework to adopt those standards, which is where the Electronic Trade Documentation Act starts laying the foundations. And thirdly, you need a reliable system or multiple reliable systems to exchange this data. That, for me, has been the single largest challenge. We had all pinned our hopes on blockchain and distributed ledger technology. I think it's fair to say that hasn't delivered.
Yes.
So, but hopefully you will end up with interoperable systems that can talk to each other, whether built by companies or banks or otherwise. And I think we're all, the last piece is participants willing to use that, which I suspect we'd all be.
Yeah.
So as a bank, obviously, we've got a vested interest in this being a trade bank, but I think you need the shippers, the freight forwarders, the customs authorities. So this is where I think regulators have a big part to play.
Alan, I'll come to you, because I was at the ASEAN summits a couple of weeks ago, and the summit brought forward its digital economic framework discussions. They're now starting, and they want to deliver by 2025, which originally was the date they were going to start talking. And the core of that is interoperability. So how much focus is there on delivering that interoperability of digital systems and data in ASEAN, and what potential does that have to radically change supply chains?
Well, that's a very important initiative of ASEAN, and that signifies that we are really serious when it comes to embracing digital economy. And part of that is, of course, the value of data governance. But when we launched the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, I think it's important to note that even before that, we have already the ASEAN Agreement on e-commerce. And then it was followed by the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, where we have a comprehensive chapter on e-commerce that basically also handle certain elements on data, such as data localization, cross-border transfer of information, and also transparency and access to certain regulations, when it comes to public information. And of course, we have upgraded the ASEAN Australia New Zealand FTA, wherein we even improved the e-commerce chapter. And again, as a result of these free trade agreements, particularly touching on e-commerce, there is this study, and we really have to expand it further to address issues or elements like interoperability. This is very important, Michael, because if you look at the RCEP region in general, take note that 50% of the global manufacturing output is here in the RCEP region. And when it comes to automotive sector, for example, that's also another 50%. And for electronics, that's 70% output. So you can just imagine that when it comes to, let's say, reconfiguring your supply chain, yes, it's very challenging, not to say difficult. So basically, your supply chains will have to evolve, and there are a lot of rooms by which you can further improve or enhance your trade and investment relationship with the other partners in the region. So this is something that we are working, and we hope that we can deliver on this as soon as possible also.
Right. Craig, I'd like to come back to you now, and I'd like to move to the ESG issue, which we've touched on. What's been the impact of ESG on Boeing's procurement, supply chain policy? I'm assuming that it's an ongoing process, but it is changing your supply chain.
Yes, it's absolutely an ongoing process, and we're working on the requirements and standards that we want to deploy throughout our supply base, and how we want to even bake that into our contractual requirements.
Yeah.
But first and foremost, one of the primary pillars of sustainability in ESG is we focus on performance, right? Looking for suppliers that can perform is key, right? Because quality performance means less scrap and less rework, less resources consumed. On-time delivery performance means less expedited one-off logistics, less resources consumed, right? So there are different ESG frameworks and requirements that we're looking at deploying, but still a key focus on suppliers that have the capability and can drive the right performance.
But that, even without the ESG issue, you'd want that anyway, wouldn't you? You
Correct.
want suppliers that can perform, that can produce high quality materials, correct, parts, whatever. And so is it any more or less important, or it's just part of what you would say is sensible business operation?
It's just sensible business operation, but yeah, I'm highlighting how critically aligned it is, right?
I see.
If you think about ESG, and particularly the sustainability element of it, it's critically aligned to how we've conducted business all along, right? Yeah. And while there are new new objectives and new standards that we're deploying to our suppliers, the tenet of performance is still key and critically aligned.
Absolutely, and I assume all multinational companies, in fact, all companies have to have that. They need to be producing high quality goods, services. But again, Daria, the ESG issue, how is that? How are you building that into your supply chain thinking and your procurement processes?
Listen, I don't think that I have much more to add to what Craig just said. It's natural. So ESG requirements is what consumers want, it's what investors want, it's what our management wants, it's what our employees want. So it's happening naturally.
Yes.
So what we do need to ensure, obviously, is that there is a certain harmonization also in the ESG requirements, like, you know, I'm sitting in Brussels, there's other countries. So, you know, like also this kind of a topic of weaponization of sustainability, I would kind of put it on the table. So, you know, let's make sure that we work towards the harmonization of requirements that would make our kind of relationship and processes more optimal and quicker to implement. But it's happening anyway, with or without regulations, because that's what actually the future of the business is.
I mean, businesses are moving down that path, but Vivek, there's a huge amount of lack of standards, lack of taxonomy. From the financing point of view, is this yet another hurdle that businesses have to overcome?
So firstly, not all businesses are moving down there. I think as our research showed, it's only 40%, and there's a huge difference across geographies. So if you talk to a company in Europe or the US, they are focused on it, but not always in all parts of the world. So only 4 out of 10 companies we spoke to is prioritizing ESG in their supply chains.
Yeah.
So it's a long way to go, right? The point that Daria made, without clear definitions, it's yet another hurdle in terms of data, right? But now we see companies trying to embed ESG into financing. So financing then becomes a carrot to change behavior. But it's early days. I think on a scale of 1 to 10, we're probably at a 2 at this point.
Right.
So even the companies who are early adopters haven't managed to push it through their supply chains.
Because if you build into your finance, it does clearly change the way a company operates.
Yes.
And if you report it as part of your financial results,
yes,
we're still a long way off that.
We're a long way from that, because at the end of the day, if you're a supplier and you need to invest in capital expenditure to build a new system, who's going to fund that?
Yes.
Because everything we talked about, cost constraints and difficult economic environment, your buyers are not going to subsidize that. And your local banks are unlikely to have insight or transparency into the relationships you've got to fund it. So financing becomes a big constraint.
Okay. Now, I'm very happy to open up the discussion to the audience and to those who are joining us virtually. So if you'd like to ask a question, please put your hand in the air and we'll bring around a microphone. If you want to ask one on Zoom, let the team know and we'll bring you on board. One more question first, though, to Alan. You mentioned the Indo-Pacific framework, which has been criticized because it doesn't allow market access. And so there is, in some quarters anyway, debate about the significance of it as a trading framework. But FTAs themselves, Daria mentioned them earlier, are they going to become more important as we have these shifts in supply chains, or the need to change supply chains to build resilience?
Well, I mentioned earlier, Michael, that when you look at supply chain resilience, this is really directly related to the degree of relationship of the country with its trade and investment partners. So in other words, if you have a strong relationship with certain countries, then it follows your businesses and also foreign investors will align with this kind of partnership. Now, in IPEC, while it is true that there is no market access, you have to bear in mind that in the process, there will be elements of market access that it will capture, not in the context, of course, of tariff liberalization, meaning tariff elimination or tariff reduction, but in the context of compliance with certain rules and regulations. And that's one big value of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. Another value that we see here as far as the Philippines is concerned is, of course, the aspect of investment. Because here, IPEF partners have embraced disciplines on environment, climate change, good governance, even labor laws, and of course, labor standards on that aspect. And these are very important when it comes to, let's say, considering investment in a particular region or locality. And noting that one critical element also of IPEF is our efforts to transition into clean economy. And what does it mean? It means green energy, renewables, etc. So from the perspective of a developing country like the Philippines, then it means investment. Meaning if, of course, Philippines will have to comply with all these undertakings of green transition, then of course, investments must also be coming from other partners, preferably the developed countries with the technology and also financing for that aspect. So basically, it's complementary. And if you have to take into account also the critical minerals that we have here in the Philippines, that gives also additional incentive or consideration for IPEF partners for them to consider Philippines as partner in this particular area.
I noticed again, as Azen's touched on that, the desire to create an EV, an electric vehicle ecosystem. And I assume that the Philippines would be keen to play a very big role in that because of your nickel deposits and the like.
Yes.
Okay, let's open up now to questions. We've got just a few minutes left. So very happy to take some questions from the audience. This gentleman here, if we could bring a microphone over. Name and organization, please, and then question.
Hi, Jonah Kaplan from Dragonfly Intelligence. Thanks, everyone. My question is how are companies preparing for a major geopolitical shock? For example, a escalation in military tensions between the US and China over Taiwan or in the South China Sea? Thank you.
Are companies planning for a military shock? I'll go to all of you. Craig, I'll start with you.
Geopolitics is absolutely one of the things that you have to factor in when looking at supply chain resilience. And in general, supply chain resilience is about single point of failure risk and how you mitigate against that single point of failure risk. A geopolitical shock, as was described, escalating military tensions creates a potential single point of failure risk in that country. So diversify away from that single point of failure risk is the solution, and is what is is an option to investigate and an option to pursue.
Vivek, are your clients looking at this as scenario planning? I've heard of it. There's a lot.
Splitting sourcing officers is one of the common features we're seeing. So, and diversifying suppliers. So, I think companies are, whether implicitly or explicitly, using supply chain resilience to plan for this.
Okay, Daria.
Yeah, maybe just to add, so scenarios. That's indeed what we do. Now, what is here? I would like to pass one message for these scenarios to be accurate and kind of to be kind of well balanced. What is really important is to enhance the dialogue between the business and foreign affairs. Right now, when we speak about international trade, our interlocutors will be mostly the trade people. Now, we see that trade is very much driven by not only trade concerns, but also trade considerations, but also foreign policy considerations, environmental considerations, so on and so forth. So this work stream between the business and foreign affairs, it's extremely important to enhance. And also there's a space for think tanks to enhance this expertise in this domain.
Next question from the audience. No? Okay, I need to wrap up because we're right on time, but one question to which you've been, Craig, I did ask you this earlier. Are we on the cusp of a gradual, slow, decade-long reshaping of supply chains globally? I think you said basically that's where you think we're going.
Yeah, I think a reshaping around more than the single-threaded dimension of cost optimization, right? So a reshaping around resilience, a reshaping around value more broadly, value defined, through multiple variables.
Daria, same question to you.
Yeah, let it be steady evolution. Let's put it this way.
What? Sorry.
Let it be a steady evolution.
A steady evolution.
I'm using your words.
Steady evolution, the gradual one, 0.5% a year or something like that. So it will happen. Alan, from the government perspective.
Well, from the government perspective, we just have to adapt, of course, economic diplomacy, more economic engagement, and increase also interdependence.
Vivek, final question to you. Are we on the cusp of what will be a long, slow, gradual, but dramatic shift?
I think it'll be more than slow, because also the nature of demand is changing a lot. So what we haven't touched upon, if demand stays like it does today, the change will be slow. But the new demand is going to be over platforms, for new services, from new economic demographics. So I think the change will be faster than slower.
Faster, all right. Yes. Because of the change in demand, because of technology, new services that are required. Yes. Tremendous. Look, I'm afraid we do have to wrap up. We're just over time. Just remains for me to thank all of our speakers. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Vivek. Thank you, Daria. Please join me in thanking today's panelists. So now we're going to focus on technology, which we touched on briefly there. Technology it's reshaping the way we're doing business, how we manage, optimize, and secure supply chains. And obviously, it's a key part, as Vivek and the others said, of ESG and achieving ESG goals. And by technology, we're talking the whole sweep here. We're talking about AI, data analytics, blockchain, and the Internet of Things. Although blockchain, as Vivek said, has not quite lived up to the hype that we were talking about here and in other Asia House events a few years ago. But still, it's technology that is being used and adopted. What are some of the issues around it? High startup costs, cyber risks, and also the potential to miss events that are unforeseen and the disruptions that they can cause supply chains. And I can tell you, as someone who's a journalist for most of his career, who was the editor of Reuters, it is the most unpredictable news environment I've ever seen. So the unforeseen event needs to be somehow baked in to scenario planning. So I want to look at digitalization now and technology and how that can create value and how that can impact supply chains. I'd like to welcome Sami Nafak, who's Chief Supply Officer at Reckitt. Sami has more than 30 years experience in the fast-moving consumer goods industry. He's worked at companies including Unilever, Danone, and Estee Lauder. He's held several leadership positions at Reckitt back from 2003 to 2009 before rejoining in 2020. And he is considered one of the top supply chain experts in Europe. Please welcome Sami.
Thank you very much.
Sami, thanks very much for being with us today. Straight to Reckitt. How are you using technology and how is that changing your supply chains?
Look, I would say to make it very top line and simple, we're using technology for three things. The first one is visibility, to understand what's going on. And that very much goes along with what's been said before. Just to dimensionalize Reckitt, we operate in about 100 countries. We have about 50 factories, 350 co-packers. And then when you go into supply, in the material side of things, we have about 4,000 suppliers and 42,000 materials.
It's huge.
It's huge. It's huge. The complexity of that is huge. So the visibility of that is critical. And that's where technology can play a role. Now, back to another point that was made. When you go beyond tier one suppliers, so you really want to get to the materials of the materials of the materials, that's even more complex. And this is even more fragmented and granular. And this is where most of the concentration, as Dr. Seung was saying, is happening. So a lot of leverage of technology to understand what's going on, to understand where the risks are, to prioritize the risk, and therefore to focus the action. The second way we're using technology is on responsiveness, right? We're in a super volatile environment.
Yeah.
Demand is super volatile and supply is super volatile. Just to give you a feel, in some categories, like disinfectants, the demand went up 25 folds during COVID.
Yeah.
And it's now back to what it was before COVID, right? If you look at the over-the-counter medicine, it's the same. It can go up 5 folds back and down in a matter of weeks. Supply is also very disrupted for a variety of reasons. So you need to have systems that allow you to scenario plan and be much more responsive and much more efficient in the way you respond, trying to balance at any point of time your service to the customers, your cost, and your working capital. And you can't do this using traditional tools. And the last one I'm going to mention, and this one I don't think that we've talked about yet, is automation. And this is not just automation for cost efficiency. The reality is that since COVID, we do have labor scarcity. It is simply difficult to get labor to work in the factories. And automation is not anymore a question of cost saving, it's a question of keeping your operations running.
So it's a supply chain issue.
As a supply chain issue. Yeah. So, in the US, the average turnover in the factories is somewhere in between 25 and 30%.
It's huge.
So it's huge. It takes 6 to 9 months to train somebody in a decent role. So we've got to leverage new technologies and new automations to be able to address this new risk.
Is one of the risks of technology or relying on technology the unforeseen event? Mind you, there's a human risk there too, because you can't see the event. How do you react quickly?
That's certainly one risk. There's a number of risks that come with technology, right? Well, this is one. Another one is the whole cybersecurity landscape, especially since typically, if you leverage technology, it's not just within your premises, right? You need to be interconnected and interfaced with a number of external parties, whether it is your suppliers, external vendors, third party giving you some data and some visibility. So yes, that brings by itself a whole bunch of new risks that we need to address.
Yeah. Where does AI fit into this? Because there's a huge amount of discussion about AI. ChatGPT has launched it to be sort of mainstream use. It's a subject of every discussion. And from the people I've spoken to, there are different views. Some say it's already been adopted and it's actively moving forward at a rapid pace. Others say a lot of hype and it's not there yet. Where are you using AI and where do you see it going in terms of supply chain resilience?
Specifically in supply chain,
yeah.
I'm somewhere in between. So we're starting to use AI in specific applications, typically on planning, for example, where we're making a huge investments in completely overhauling our planning landscape and planning systems. And we're using AI to actually, one thing is to get the visibility, understand what's going on. Another one is to take decisions and to balance almost real time your supply with the demand. That's one area where we're using AI. We're also using some level of AIs in our procurement vulnerability assessment, right? So when it's about trying to understand out of this hugely complex landscape, where are the critical risks and what are the potential actions, whether substitution, diversification, localization, you name it, that's also why we're using some level of AI engine. Yeah. But it's still pretty emerging.
It is emerging, but beyond supply chains, I'm curious about your views because you work for a huge multinational company operating in scores of markets.
Well, where there is some very high interest in AI, but not yet materially, tangibly active, is in the whole space of creation.
Yeah.
Right? The whole space of marketing creation, the whole space of content creation, etc. That's where there is some potentially very exciting things coming up with AI.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned automation as being a key part of resilience to supply chains, but where does technology fit in with Reckitt's plans in terms of the ESG requirements? I assume it's playing and needs to play a fairly substantial role.
Yes, so, and I would say two things on ESG. First, technology, again, back to the point on visibility, it helps you understand how ESG compliance resilient is your supply chain. So I'll give you an example. We buy quite a lot of palm oil, not for food, but because we use a lot of palm oil in soap, in soap noodles. We all know that palm oil is a quite sensitive material, and there's a lot of discussion about biodiversity and the conditions and the which it's made. We are actually leveraging technology and using satellite images to understand to the farm level, not to the mill, but to the farm. So really to the starting point, how are our suppliers handling the palm oil production and how we are addressing the impact on biodiversity.
So you're using satellites?
Yeah, we're using satellites.
Yeah.
Exactly. And we're mapping, we know exactly where the farms are, and we're mapping the footprint of the farms and monitoring the impact on biodiversity. Of course, making sure that it's minimal. That's one thing. The other thing is from a risk standpoint, because there's something about ESG which is about your responsibility and caring for the environment. There is another side, which is the climate change is actually affecting the continuity of your supply.
Yes.
We do buy a lot of agro-based commodities. So we buy sugar, we buy citric acid, which is based on corn, etc., etc. Technology gives you visibility on the potential risks based on the crops, right? So this is also an area where you can use AI so that you can be scenario planning and you can be proactively anticipating some issues you might have. Another element of that is water. Out of 50 factories, 20 are operating in the water scarce area, more or less, but water scarce area. Monitoring what's going on with the water and anticipating potential issues of water is quite critical. And again, that's something that technology allows you to do.
So technology plays a role in your risk assessment, your scenario planning, and a big one. Can I touch on blockchain? I mentioned it in my introduction because I remember 5-6 years ago speaking at various things and hearing experts say blockchain's the future. It's the revolution, something we did last week in the Middle East. And there was actually quite apparent that the enthusiasm has waned. Are you using blockchain? Do you see that as the future in terms of supply chains? And if not, why not?
Look, I think there was a lot of excitement on the blockchain. I don't think, as one of the previous speakers have said, I don't think it's done as much as we expected. Yes, we're using some of it. We're using procurement because it does guarantee from both financial flow but also quality traceability. It guarantees some level of security. But blockchain works if it's widely spread, right? That's the issue. It only works if it's spread across your chain of procurement, which is far from being the case.
Yes.
So there is some use, but with a lot of limitations still.
So it requires more adoption, but it also does it not require more standardization? Isn't
Absolutely.
That yeah, yeah. Is that one of the in terms of technology broadly, is it harmonization, is it standardization, is it common regulation? Are they some of the impediments that companies like Reckitt face in terms of adopting technology to make their supply chains more resilient or their organizations more efficient generally?
Look, yes and no. I think there's been a lot of progress from a technology standpoint. There's been a lot of progress on being able to harmonize and standardize data, even though they come in very different formats.
Yeah.
So that used to be an issue. It's less and less an issue. So more and more we can standardize data, clean data, and use data which are coming from very different sources in very different formats, and aggregating them and making use of it internally. When it comes externally, when it comes about protocols and for data exchange and suite of technologies, etc. Yes, it's still an issue because a lot of countries and especially we're operating a number of regulatory categories, right? We're doing quite a bit of pharma. Each country has its own technological platform, data standard, etc., which makes it much more difficult.
Yeah. The subject of the discussion broadly is reimagining supply chains, and there are multiple forces at work. We've discussed in this geopolitics, there are trade agreements and new trading relationship, regionalization. But is technology the biggest disruptor? Is that going to drive the most change? And is that going to enable the new supply chains to become more resilient?
It's a tough question. So my spontaneous answer would be no. I see it more as an enabler and actually a way, if you leverage it, to address some of the challenges that we have. Because the main drivers are the geopolitical changes, the ESG agenda, the workforce, etc., etc. So technology is an enabler that allows you to find solutions or better solutions to address the challenges. AI might be the complete disruptor.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it's a bit soon to say, but it is quite likely to be completely disruptive.
All right. So of the other issues, is it the geopolitics, the fragmentation? Is that, from Reckitt's point of view, what's driving your change more? Is it the ESG agenda?
It's three things. If I have to select three, it's the geopolitical landscape and all the disruptions which are shaking this balance that we had for the last few decades. It is the ESG agenda, which is clearly changing. I mean, beyond the trade barriers, etc., shipping by air from the other side of the world to the country where you sell is going to be less and less feasible.
Yes.
Sourcing from unsustainable sources and suppliers is not going to be acceptable anymore. So there's quite some changes. And the last one is the volatility. The volatility on demand and supply is creating a complete different way of operating than we used to.
Is that, just final question, is that peculiar to this period in time? Is that triggered by the pandemic? Or is that, and also possibly macroeconomic issues like cost of living and inflation, and interest rates and the like? Or is that just the nature of the business, the consumer business in which you operate?
It's a combination of the two. I mean, the pandemic certainly had a catalyst effect.
Yes.
So we do see much more volatility on the demand than we had before. Not that it wasn't volatile, but we changed dimension. And then on the supply used to be reasonably consistent, reliable, and predictable. It is not anymore at all.
Right.
So the combination of the two is making life interesting.
Great. Sami, we need to leave it there. Please join me in thanking Sami Nafak.
Thank you.
And we need to wrap up. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you for those who are joining us virtually. My great thanks to McKinsey, our partners in this fascinating research. Whether it's gradual, not gradual, quick or not, I'm not sure. But clearly there's an enormous amount happening in supply chains. Brilliant reports, really interesting, and we'd like to explore them more further. So thank you all very much for being here. Have a very good day and do stay in touch with Asia House. Bye for now.